The knock came just as the sky outside Emma's small suburban house was turning soft orange, the kind of early evening that usually brought her peace, but this knock felt different, hesitant, uneven, as if the person on the other side was unsure whether to stay or run. Emma paused mid-step, a strange feeling tightening her chest before she even reached the door, and when she opened it, she saw her nephew Lucas standing there with his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his face pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cool air. He looked older than she remembered, taller, broader, but his eyes gave him away immediately. Those eyes held worry, fear, and something else she couldn't name yet. Lucas tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes, and that alone told Emma this visit was not casual, not a quick hello or a family check-in. She stepped aside without asking questions, letting him in, noticing how he hesitated at the doorway like crossing the threshold required courage he was still gathering. Inside, the house was quiet, warm, and familiar, yet Lucas didn't relax. He sat on the edge of the couch instead of leaning back, his knee bouncing, his gaze fixed on the floor as if the truth he carried was written there and he was afraid to look away. Emma watched him closely, every small movement telling a story, his shallow breaths, the way his jaw tightened, the silence stretching longer than normal, and she understood that whatever had brought him here had been building for a long time. She spoke gently, not wanting to scare him away from the moment. He answered in short words at first, careful words, like someone testing the ground before taking a step, and then he fell quiet again, swallowing hard, clearly struggling with something that felt bigger than him. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, the ticking clock suddenly loud, the light from the lamp soft but unforgiving, and Emma felt the shift, the moment when an ordinary evening quietly turned into something important. Lucas finally spoke, his voice low and tight, admitting he didn't know where else to go, and those words landed heavier than any confession could have because they carried trust, fear, and need all at once. Emma didn't rush him, didn't offer advice or comfort too soon. She knew this kind of moment required patience, because if she pushed, he might shut down, and if she waited, he might open up in ways he hadn't planned. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of everything Lucas wasn't saying yet, full of emotions he had been carrying alone, and Emma sensed that once he started, he wouldn't be able to stop. He shifted on the couch, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them, his voice finally breaking through the quiet with a simple admission that something in his life was wrong, that he had made a mistake, or maybe several, and that he didn't know how to fix it. Emma felt a familiar ache in her chest, the kind that came from recognizing pain she had once known herself, the kind born from caring too deeply and not knowing what to do with those feelings. Lucas kept his eyes down as he spoke, afraid of what he might see in her face, afraid of judgment, but Emma gave him none. She gave him space instead, and that space allowed his words to come faster now, less controlled, as if once the door opened, everything rushed forward. He spoke of confusion, of sleepless nights, of thoughts that wouldn't quiet no matter how busy he tried to make himself, and though he avoided details, Emma understood the shape of the problem. It was emotional, heavy, and tied to the heart. His voice shook when he admitted he felt something he wasn't ready to feel, something that didn't fit neatly into his life or his plans, something that made him feel both alive and ashamed at the same time. The room felt smaller as his truth took form, not because it was wrong, but because it was real, and real things tend to fill every corner. Emma noticed the way Lucas clenched his fists when he spoke, the way his breath hitched when he got close to saying too much, and she realized that the nervous look at the door hadn't been about coming inside the house, it had been about stepping into honesty. Outside, a car passed, a neighbor laughed, life went on without noticing this quiet turning point, but inside the house, something had shifted, something irreversible. Lucas paused again, clearly reaching the edge of what he felt safe saying, and Emma sensed that this was only the beginning, that this visit would unfold in layers, each one heavier than the last. She met his eyes then, steady and calm, letting him know without words that he was safe here, that whatever truth waited behind his fear could be spoken, and that moment, small, silent, and fragile, was the real beginning of the story, the moment where nervousness met trust, and a young man stood on the edge of telling the truth that had been quietly changing his life. Lucas stayed on the edge of the couch, hands fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve, eyes still fixed on the floor, as if the words he needed to say were trapped there and only the floor could release them. Emma watched quietly, sensing the storm behind his calm exterior, knowing that forcing him to speak would break the fragile trust he had brought with him through the door, so she waited, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension grow into something almost tangible, a quiet pressure that made the air thick and every tick of the clock louder, and then, finally, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant, breaking the quiet like a fragile branch snapping under pressure, admitting first in a murmur, "I messed up," and those 3 words, simple yet heavy, hung in the room like clouds before a storm, filled with regret, fear, and unspoken consequences. Emma didn't interrupt, didn't question, because she knew that sometimes people had to say their own truths before anyone could help, and she waited, offering a calm presence that made it easier for him to continue, easier for him to let the words tumble out. Without shame, Lucas's eyes flickered toward her, searching, pleading silently for understanding, and then he took a deep breath and revealed more, the confession spilling out in small bursts. "There's someone I shouldn't feel this way about," and in that instant, the room seemed to shrink, gravity pulling them into the quiet space of unspoken emotion, because Emma understood, even without details, that this was no ordinary crush, no passing fancy, but a deep, complicated feeling that Lucas had tried to ignore, hide, and deny, only to have it grow stronger, pressing on him until it demanded acknowledgement, and Emma felt a quiet ache in her chest, a recognition of the same kind of helpless longing that every human heart feels at some point, when desire and timing collide inconveniently. Lucas's voice trembled slightly as he went on, naming the person, Claire, and admitting that she was older, not by much, but enough that he felt a constant, nagging sense of wrongness, a guilt mixed with longing that made every thought of her both thrilling and terrifying, and he kept glancing at Emma as if to measure her reaction, worried that she might judge him, worried that the simple act of confessing might shatter the delicate balance of their relationship, and yet he had to speak, had to release the weight he had carried alone for weeks. Emma's heart softened, knowing that love, even when complicated, was never truly wrong, and she offered him a quiet, steady presence, her eyes meeting his briefly, signaling that she was listening, understanding, and not condemning, and that small gesture seemed to give Lucas courage, because the next words spilled faster, less measured, filled with both longing and frustration. "I think she feels it too, but we both pretend we don't," and in that moment, Emma realized the depth of Lucas's inner struggle, the way he balanced hope and fear, attraction and propriety, and the tension of holding unspoken feelings in a space where no one could see or acknowledge them. Lucas's gaze dropped again, voice dropping to a whisper, full of the ache of unvoiced emotions. "I keep telling myself it'll fade, but it hasn't. It just hurts more," and the room felt heavier, the silence thick around them as Emma absorbed the honesty, knowing that pain often grows in the shadows, unnoticed, and that what Lucas needed most wasn't advice, but acknowledgement, a witness to his heart. She leaned slightly forward, careful not to crowd him, giving him space but also offering a quiet signal of safety, and Lucas, after a pause, admitted the hardest part. Words laced with fear and longing, "There's something else," and that small phrase, simple yet loaded, made Emma's pulse quicken slightly, sensing that the revelation would deepen the emotional stakes, change the dynamic, and possibly alter the trajectory of both their lives in subtle ways, because sometimes the truths we fear most carry the weight of our future happiness. He shifted again, breathing unevenly, hands still restless, and Emma realized that the words he held back were not just about love, but about courage, about the risk of being vulnerable, about the tremor between longing and propriety, and that the room, quiet and warm, had become a sanctuary where Lucas could let down his guard, release the tension, and voice the emotions he had kept hidden, emotions that were messy, confusing, but entirely human. Lucas's next words, though soft, cut through the quiet with the force of honesty. "I didn't come here to ask what to do. I came because I needed someone to know how much it hurts," and in that instant, Emma understood completely, because she had felt the same, the ache of unshared feelings, the restless nights spent pondering possibilities, the longing for someone to simply listen, to witness the heart in pain, and she offered him a nod, small but meaningful, a signal that she understood without judgment, a bridge for him to continue. Lucas exhaled shakily, relief mingling with continued tension, and the words, once trapped in his chest, now floated freely, raw and unedited, full of longing, doubt, hope, and fear, and as he spoke, Emma's heart matched the rhythm of his confession, empathetic, tender, filled with the recognition that love in its many forms, complicated, inconvenient, unexpected, was always worth acknowledging, always worth feeling, and that in sharing his truth, Lucas had taken the first step toward both understanding himself and confronting the reality he had avoided for too long. The room, still and quiet around them, became a container for honesty, a space where emotions could be felt fully, without shame, without interruption, and Emma, seated beside him, knew that this was the moment that would shape what came next, because the act of speaking, of naming the heart's desires, of admitting longing and confusion, was itself transformative, and that transformation had begun the instant Lucas chose to trust her, to speak aloud what he had been carrying alone. And though the evening outside continued as usual, the world around them unchanged, inside, a young man had stepped closer to truth, toward clarity, and toward the emotional journey that would define his coming days, leaving Emma quietly aware that this was the start of something deeper, more emotional, and entirely human, the kind of moment that lingered long after the words were spoken. Lucas shifted on the edge of the couch again, hands twisting nervously in his lap, eyes darting to the floor and then to Emma, as if searching for permission to speak the part he had been avoiding, the part that made his chest tighten and his throat dry, and finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he let it out, "She's moving away, next month," and the words fell into the room like sudden rain, heavy and cold, changing the air, making the space between them feel smaller, more urgent, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen to the heartbreak he carried. Emma's heart clenched. Immediately, understanding the weight of what he had just said, knowing that this revelation explained the nervous knock, the hesitant steps, and the restless energy that had followed him since the moment he walked in, because when someone you care about faces distance, every second becomes amplified, every glance carries meaning, and every unspoken feeling presses harder on the chest. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, voice cracking slightly as he continued, "I thought distance would make it easier, that time would make it fade, but it hasn't. It only makes me realize how much it matters." And in that moment, Emma saw the raw truth of his emotions, the way longing and fear can twist together, creating a blend of hope and despair that feels impossible to untangle, and she stayed silent, letting him speak, letting him unload the burden he had carried alone for weeks, because sometimes listening is the most powerful support anyone can offer. He looked up at her then, eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and desperation, and admitted, "I didn't come here for advice. I came because I needed someone to know, someone to see how much it hurts," and the honesty in his voice, unguarded and sincere, made the room feel both heavier and lighter at the same time, heavier with the weight of emotion, lighter because it had finally been shared, finally made real, no longer trapped inside him, echoing only in his mind. Emma reached out slightly, resting a hand lightly near his arm, not touching, not intruding, but signaling that she was there, that she understood, that she would hold this moment with him. And Lucas exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and continued tension in the sound, as though speaking aloud had released part of the pressure but also made the remaining feelings sharper, more urgent, because admitting a truth doesn't erase it, it clarifies it, and now he had to face what came next. He paused, swallowing hard, voice dropping to a trembling whisper, "I keep thinking I should tell her. Not to change anything, not to force anything, just so she knows how I feel, just once." And the confession hung in the air, delicate yet heavy, filled with longing and fear, the kind that makes your stomach ache and your heart race at the same time. And Emma felt that ache with him, remembering her own moments of uncertainty, when timing and circumstance collided with the heart's desires, making each choice feel impossibly consequential. Lucas leaned back slightly, eyes closing for a moment, a breath catching in his throat, and then opening them again to meet Emma's gaze, silently asking if it was okay to hope, if it was okay to feel, if it was okay to be vulnerable. And Emma nodded subtly, letting him know that his feelings were valid, that courage was in speaking them, and that the pain of longing was a mark of being human, not a fault or weakness. The room seemed to shrink around them, the quiet stretching, holding every nuance of emotion, every tremor in his voice, every hesitation in his movement. And Emma realized that this conversation, this confession, was transforming both of them in subtle ways, creating a bond through honesty and empathy, a shared understanding that didn't need to be spoken further to be felt deeply. And that bond made Lucas braver even as his heart ached, giving him the courage to face his next steps with clarity, even though he didn't yet know what those steps would be. "I don't know if she feels the same," he admitted next. Voice low, I searching hers for reassurance, but we both act like it doesn't matter, like it's not there, and pretending only makes it hurt more. And Emma felt the familiar sting of longing that comes from unspoken feelings, from the tension of what could be versus what is, and she offered him a gentle, steady presence, letting him lean into her empathy without fear of judgment or interruption, creating a space where his heart could be honest, raw, and safe. He rubbed his hands together nervously, shoulders tense, gaze flicking to the door as if escape was an option he couldn't take, and continued, "Every day I tell myself I'll be fine, that I'll move on, but I can't stop thinking about her, about what we might have, what we might never have," and each word seemed to release a little more of the burden he had carried silently, each phrase a step toward clarity, a step toward accepting the truth that feelings, once acknowledged, demand action or resolution. Emma listened intently, absorbing every word, every pause, every tremor in his voice, and she felt the full weight of Lucas's heart in that moment, the vulnerability, the longing, the fear, and the quiet bravery it took just to speak aloud what he had hidden for so long, and she knew that this was a turning point, a moment that would shape the way he approached both love and life, because acknowledging the truth is the first step toward growth, healing, and courage. Even when the path ahead is uncertain and every choice carries risk, Lucas exhaled again, a long, shaky breath, and whispered, "I don't want to regret not saying anything, not telling her how I feel, even if it changes nothing. I need her to know," and the intensity of that desire filled the room, a mixture of desperation and hope, fear and longing, the raw essence of young hearts grappling with timing, emotion, and the weight of distance. Emma, sitting beside him yet leaving space for him to breathe, nodded slightly, encouraging him without words, and in that silence, Lucas felt both supported and challenged, understanding that courage wasn't just in confessing, but in accepting whatever came after, the uncertainty, the possible heartbreak, and the unexpected relief that honesty can bring. The clock ticked softly, the evening light waned, and the world outside continued unaware of the quiet, emotional storm unfolding within the living room, a storm made of whispered confessions, trembling hope, and the fragile, delicate truth of a young man learning to face his heart, learning that love is not always about possession, but about honesty, vulnerability, and the bravery to feel deeply, even when the outcome is unknown. And as Lucas sat there, voice low, heart racing, he realized that speaking this truth had changed something inside him, that he had crossed a threshold from private longing to shared honesty, and that crossing, though terrifying, was the most important step he could take toward understanding himself and whatever future awaited with Claire, knowing that sometimes the act of confessing is more powerful than any response it might elicit, and that moment, heavy, intimate, and full of unspoken emotion, would stay with both of them long after the evening ended. When Lucas finally stood, the tension in the room shifted, a quiet heaviness following him to the doorway as he prepared to leave, and Emma noticed how even the simple act of standing carried the weight of weeks of unspoken emotions, the careful control of longing, fear, and courage interwoven into every movement, and as he turned back, his eyes met hers with a mixture of gratitude and lingering uncertainty, whispering without words the depth of what he had shared and the trust he had placed in her, saying softly, "Thank you for listening, for really listening," and in that moment, Emma smiled, a gentle, warm expression that acknowledged his vulnerability and affirmed that honesty, even when painful, was a gift worth giving, and Lucas, feeling lighter yet still charged with emotion, stepped out into the cool evening, the sound of the closing door behind him resonating like the echo of the conversation they had just shared, leaving Emma standing silently in the living room, processing the gravity of the moment, the intensity of the feelings that had flowed between them, and the quiet realization that witnessing someone's truth is a rare and powerful experience, one that changes both the speaker and the listener. As she moved to the window and watched him walk down the path, the fading light casting long shadows across the yard, she thought about the moments in life when timing is cruel, when distance threatens connection, and when people must choose between silence and the courage to express what their hearts cannot ignore, and she understood that Lucas had taken the first step toward that courage, confronting not only his feelings for Claire but also his own fears of rejection, judgment, and loss, and in doing so, he had created a space for himself to grow, to feel, and to navigate the complexities of love with honesty, a lesson that Emma recognized as universal, one that resonated far beyond the walls of her living room. A week passed, the days moving with ordinary rhythm, yet Emma felt the lingering presence of that evening, the echo of Lucas's confession, the tremor of his emotions, and then a small ping on her phone brought her attention to a message from him, short, almost hesitant, yet loaded with meaning. "I told her." She didn't promise anything. But she listened. And somehow, that was enough, and as she read the words, Emma felt a quiet swell of pride and relief, knowing that he had chosen to face his fears, to speak his heart despite the uncertainty of the response, and that choice, brave and vulnerable, was a victory in itself, marking the start of a journey toward emotional maturity, self-awareness, and the potential for connection. Regardless of outcome, Emma sat back, reflecting on the way honesty transforms people, how speaking the truth, even in small, difficult moments, can lift invisible weights, and she realized that Lucas had not only shared his longing but had also entrusted her with a piece of his inner world, an act that deepened their bond, strengthened trust, and created a shared memory of courage and emotional intimacy, a memory that would shape both of their perspectives on love, fear, and vulnerability. The message, simple yet profound, carried with it the essence of human connection, the desire to be seen, to be understood, and to risk exposure for the sake of authenticity. And Emma recognized that this was one of life's most beautiful lessons, that sometimes the act of confessing, of reaching out, of allowing oneself to be fully known, is more meaningful than any response, more transformative than any outcome, because it affirms the human capacity to feel, to care, and to hope, even in the face of uncertainty. As she put the phone down, Emma thought about Claire, about Lucas's feelings, about the fleeting nature of time, and about the courage it takes to act before opportunities slip away, and she felt a quiet admiration for his bravery, understanding that love, in all its complicated forms, is often about small, deliberate choices, about acknowledging the heart's truth even when it is inconvenient, frightening, or seemingly impossible, and that in doing so, people not only connect with others but also with their own hearts, learning who they are, what they value, and what risks they are willing to take for the sake of honesty and emotional integrity. The evening light faded completely, shadows stretching across the room, yet inside, a warm glow remained, born of empathy, understanding, and the quiet satisfaction of witnessing growth. And Emma realized that life often gives these subtle, profound moments when human emotion is laid bare, when trust and vulnerability create connections that resonate far beyond a single conversation, shaping memories, decisions, and even future relationships. She imagined Lucas speaking to Claire, the words trembling yet genuine, the courage that had been nurtured in the living room carrying him through the uncertain terrain of confession, and Emma felt a sense of hope, a belief in the power of truth to transform hearts, to bridge gaps, and to create moments of tenderness that linger, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, but always meaningfully, leaving impressions that shape character, empathy, and understanding. She thought about the evenings journey, the nervous knock, the hesitant steps, the confessions spoken and received, the unspoken lessons learned, and how a single act of vulnerability could ripple outward, affecting not only those directly involved but also the subtle ways in which they perceive love, courage, and human connection. And as Emma finally moved to the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of tea, the warmth spreading through her hands, she reflected on the delicate balance of fear and hope that defines human relationships, on the importance of witnessing someone's heart without judgment, and on the quiet, transformative power of listening, understanding, and holding space for another's emotions, recognizing that in that small living room, on that ordinary evening, a young man had faced his heart, taken a brave step toward honesty, and in doing so, reminded both of them that courage, love, and vulnerability are intertwined in the most profound ways, shaping who we are and how we relate to others, leaving an enduring impression that would remain long after the evening had ended, quietly teaching the value of empathy, the strength in honesty, and the beauty in allowing oneself to be truly seen.